Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fireside Chicago, where we host fireside chats with prominent leaders from Chicago's business community, live on Zoom with Q&A. We also do this through podcast. If you like to check out podcasts, anywhere that you can listen to a podcast, you can check us out. Starting in July of 2020, we're going to be putting our first 20 episodes all on all platforms at the same time. You can also check us out on YouTube if you like to see long form or clips of our episodes from there. I'm your host, Tim Shum. We're going to be jumping into a conversation with heads of people at various organizations throughout Chicago. We've had business owners, CEOs on the show, venture capital folks, private equity folks. I wanted to get a group of peers, folks in my network, folks that became recommended, folks from the tech community that are leading people operations and are growing their organizations and their people departments, folks from maybe larger organizations, just to get a perspective on what's going on with the COVID situation, everything that's going on in 2020. I mean, shout out to the people. If you're an HR leader, if you're an HR generalist, if you're in organizational development, leadership development, recruiting, you name it, this group has had a lot on their plates. I think that is by far an understatement. I think this group, in a lot of senses, gets underappreciated, and we want to call out a lot of the things that are going on in HR. There's a lot of things that have happened over the last 8 years in building out a playbook. We've had record growth year over year. We've had this 8-year bull run. We've had record unemployment, and a certain playbook has been developed over that time on HR leadership, how to run talent management, how to run talent operations. And seemingly overnight, that kind of got flipped over its head. From the 8 weeks, week ending March 22nd, and then the subsequent 8 weeks from there, we went from record low unemployment in our country in the 3% range to the highest unemployment in the last 70 years. Over 40 million people have lost their jobs. We're recording this on June 25th, 2020, just this morning, which is a Thursday. Every Thursday, this number comes out. Another 1 million people filed for unemployment claims, which is a bonkers number, which these numbers we're just getting used to through this pandemic. The white-collar workforce is primarily forced to work from home. Essential workers are working in increasingly challenging environments with health risks. The coronavirus is still taking its toll on the health of Americans, really with no end in sight. There's racial inequality due to systemic racism, police brutality of people of color, that's brought the Black Lives Matter movement to the forefront of the nation, and of course all the citizens, and then of course to all the corporations and employees that sit within those corporations all across the country. This is affecting all of us in various ways, but I wanted to shed more light on how this is affecting the HR folks, the people out there. Just speaking chronologically from March, at first it was business continuity planning due to lockdowns. Hey, we need to figure out how to continue to run business. We're not going to be in the office anymore. Hey, HR, figure it out. Oh, by the way, the CARES Act came out, which is great for the country. It affects a lot of different people, but it affects every single legalized business in the country. Hey, HR, can you talk to our employment attorneys and get this figured out? Layoffs, of course, furloughs, severance packages, not to mention most of my clients are HR leaders. The HR teams are getting impacted. I don't want to say the most, but they're getting impacted by these reduction in forces, which is causing folks to do more with less. The Black Lives Matter movement, associated protests, and the corporate responsibility towards DEI initiatives is coming to the forefront. Not all, but HR is involved. Return to work initiatives to keep employees safe. Now we're opening up. Hey, we need to get back to the office, figure out how we're going to go about doing that. Oh, by the way, we're going to start hiring again. You can't use recruiters. You can't hire back furloughed recruiters. I need you to figure it out. So needless to say, there's a lot going on. I deal with this just being from the human capital industry all the time. And with that, I'm going to introduce our guests here. First, we have Randi Jakubowitz, VP of People at Paro. Paro was founded in August of 2015. She has experienced impressive growth, including a $10 million Series A in 2019. Randi has built out the people department from scratch and is currently leading efforts to navigate their team through the COVID pandemic. Prior to that, she has held various talent and people leadership roles at Grubhub, Seamless, and several other lower middle market organizations. Randi, thank you for carving out the time and welcome. We also have Elles Skony, VP of Talent Management at Centro. Centro is a software provider for digital advertisers with just under 1,000 employees, starting her career in human capital services. Over the past 10 years, she has touched every area of HR, people, talent at Centro through its continued growth over that 10-year period, which has been impressive. Elles, thank you for carving out some time. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And then we have David Loiselle. David's been on the show before, founder of LOHIGH Consulting, a firm he started after a 2 decades long career in HR, people leadership roles, primarily within the technology and hospitality sectors. Most recently, he was the senior vice president of HR at Numerator and VP of HR and people operations at ShiftGig. David, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
All right, so let's start this off. David, I'm going to put you on the spot. You have various clients at various stages of growth, various sizes. Let's just walk through what's been going on in your world, in your clients' world, call it mid-March through today. And I know there's been a lot, but maybe try to keep it around 90 seconds.
Yeah, will do. I think, one thing that has been interesting to me is that conversations haven't slowed down. Conversations have actually increased. They've just shifted. And I think it's what probably many people on this call are feeling, is that what we were talking about deeply and passionately on how to run a really strong business in January and February is quite different than what we're talking about today. And I mentioned this on our last call. I feel strongly that there's a really, really compassionate effort to understand what people are going through today. And that's translated for the clients that I work with in how to, one, get through every day, running your business, but understanding what people are going through, and two, how to plan for the future, to be really, really thoughtful in making sure that the people that you're engaged with, whether they be clients or customers or employees, are just committed and following along with the new world order, which is quite different than it was 3 months ago.
Absolutely. Well said. Elles, you're at Centro. You've been there majority of your career, various roles. Maybe describe Centro, how they're getting impacted by the COVID pandemic, how your team is reacting to that, and some of the things that are top of mind and how you're focusing on this.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So, Centro, we started this year with one of our strongest quarters in Q1, and then global pandemic hit. So we launched right into budget planning. We've been very transparent with the organization around, how we are planning, or we basically created a new budget within, a week or two, which usually takes months of planning. Created a new budget, rolled that out to the organization so they could see, all the stages that this presents to us as a business with such a flexible and unknown revenue stream coming in this year. And a lot of that included also, sitting down with our leadership and planning in a proactive way, which was a nice kind of outcome of a very bad situation, to say, what do we need Centro to be coming out of this, and how do we become stronger coming out of it? So really great strategic, even though, COVID brought it on, conversations that I've enjoyed having. And then, most recently, just heads down and focused on our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and making sure that employees know everything we've been doing and know everything we're committed to doing. So that's where the, the large projects have been on my end the last few months.
Well said. Well said. We're going to jump into our first topic. We're going to try to hit various topics throughout this conversation and try to structure it in a certain way. The first topic is being, what's the new normal for organizations? There's been companies that 100% in the office, you have to be in the office. There's some companies that are a little bit more flexible before all of this. I think that's, in general, if it's not shifting for every company, it's at least starting the conversation. Randi, you and I have spoken about this and, different thoughts about this. How is Paro? How are you thinking about it? How are some of your peers thinking about this?
Yeah, so the new normal is going to continue to change and evolve. And, the way we think about this is just about how can we continue to support our people. And right now with the COVID environment, it's what do people need to do for their own best health and safety for themselves and for their families. So we're trying to get comfortable testing different things out, see what works for them, what works for the business. So, the new normal right now is reopening the office, letting a certain number of people back in, but also making sure that people are comfortable working from home. And the new normal is really just trying to be transparent in how much we communicate right now. So we're communicating out as much as we can through at least the end of the year. So we've told people this is what you can expect now through the end of the year. And they know that we're constantly evaluating and helping people understand that the decisions we're making are for their own health and safety. So, you know, the theme being constantly evaluating, over communicating. They probably hear the same message every single week, but, you know, again, we're doing this all for their own best interest.
David, anything to add there?
Yeah, I just read a stat that said 90% of employees or people want to retain the freedom to work flexibly after COVID. And so I think the few words I pulled out of that, and we dialogued around this yesterday as a group here, was freedom and flexibility. And I think where some leaders are getting caught up is that they see this as a very black and white issue. Do we allow work from home, or do we want everyone in the office? And I think there's a real range in there of how people can adapt their work style and their work, their performance in a variety of environments. We all read an article yesterday called Work From Anywhere. Sounds like a crazy concept. Oh my goodness, how can we do that? How are we gonna pay taxes? How are we gonna keep tabs with people? Work from anywhere isn't a bad thing. It is literally meaning work from anywhere might mean you need to be in the office 2 days a week because that's where you work best. But then other days you might work here or there or here. And so I think that having that flexibility is going to be important moving forward. I know it's scary and there's a lot of pros and cons, both for organizations and for people. But there's going to be a desire for flexibility moving forward. And with the exception of, a handful of industries like personal service-based industries, I think to be competitive in tomorrow's world, we'll have to figure it out. And I'm glad people are putting a lot of attention on it today.
Yeah, and one thing on the new normal that got me thinking, just off both of what you just said, I've seen this across other companies and definitely within Centro, but one kind of silver lining from all of this is that generally the communication has been so much more during this, which is a really wonderful thing to see. Like I feel like as a company, we feel more connected to our employees than we ever have been because we are more often surveying, we're more often communicating out, and that's what you have to do to kind of keep this, ever-changing thing moving. But I hope that that's something that just becomes the new normal, because the dialogue is really great to see, and the ability to change our policies and our practices quickly, because we literally know 90% of our workforce wants to be more flexible versus kind of guessing sometimes, has been something that I hope continues with companies and employees and communication.
Your company is not alone. There's some pretty powerful studies out there now talking about increased collaboration through our current environment. Collaboration's up. There's a risk or there's a fear that culture might be down. So there's a way that we need to bring that balance, but collaboration is way up. And so there's a focus on that. There's a few states and cities out there that are paying people to move there. I don't know if you're familiar with this. And I think that's worth noting, because if we currently work in an urban market, most of us are here in Chicago, there might be a flight. Talent might decide to leave elsewhere. And the state of Vermont's going to give you $10,000. Topeka, Kansas is going to give you $15,000 if you want to move there. People might want to relocate and work from elsewhere. The talent market is still competitive, even with this unemployment.
I think though that, we're a smaller organization at Paro, and so while our business model very much supports remote work, for a smaller company, the concept of remote work, and right now 100% of our people are based in Illinois, the concept of, hey, I want to go work in this state, or I want to go work in this state, from a business standpoint, in the world that we're in, it can be very scary to business owners and executives and finance teams in particular, for people to say, hey, I want to go work from California, or hey, I want to go work from New York, because they start to see dollar signs associated with making these changes. And so I think as much as we as HR leaders want to be able to empower and give choice, because I think choice and communication are probably the key components of what's making this successful right now, that it can be really scary in how you think about making this whole world successful, because it's more than just flexibility to work from home in the current state where you live, the whole realm of possibilities for people are starting to open up. Like, oh, hey, I wanted to go move to California at some point in my career. It was a bucket list to go live in New York City, and maybe now is the time I can go do that. And the question really is, can companies support those goals for people?
Yeah, the list is like this for all the logistics and
As you think about, like, people have been quarantined for so many months and may not have been able to achieve goals, personal, professional, for a span of time. And now it's like, oh, they're starting to see light that maybe they can go after some of these bucket lists. Now these conversations are going to start to happen.
But with that said, why not then let's get on board early and starting to create the framework for supporting this, and whether this be shifting the work. If you have a people operations team, I feel like people operations should be leaning in heavy to say, what do we need to do to support flexible work? Because we want to, like, now we're shifting the work we're doing and how we're framing out employment with our organization. And my guess is technology solutions will continue to evolve and enter the market to allow this to be even better than it is today. And you know, everyone jumped on Zoom, but there's already 20 different options to increase collaboration, culture, communication, goal setting, and all the metrics needed to make sure that we're productive.
Yeah, I think an important piece of that definitely can't be missed also is it shifts the culture, right? If you make a decision, that you're fully remote or hybrid remote or remote first, like all of those cultural shifts have lots of implications behind them. And like one example is if you are used to being in the office and a lot of your company will still be in the office, but you want to say that you are, remote friendly or that you are flexible friendly, you have to shift how those meetings happen. You can't have 3/4 of the people in the room and people just on the phone who are remote. Like they have to all be a virtual meeting, even if you're sitting in the same room. So there's a lot of those cultural shifts that I think go maybe forgotten when it's really, enticing to just want to lead the way in the trends. So there's like a lot more discussion there with leadership.
There's a few things that are coming to mind. We're a recruiting firm. We have 32 team members. We're talking to a lot of candidates that recently got laid off, that got a taste for the first time working from home. And more often than not, they're going to be seeking some sort of flexibility if they didn't have it before, now that they have that taste. And I think from a talent attraction standpoint, that's going to be on the forefront of a lot of companies' minds, because it's on the candidates' minds for sure. It always comes back to what does your leadership want to do, right? If your C-levels jonesing to get back to the office and they're gung-ho on doing that, despite, you might be in a position where you have to be forced to look at, all right, what are the steps of that? What's that going to do to our culture? Is there fear from a health standpoint? And going back, Randi, I think you and I were having a conversation around, all right, what does that look like if you're in a high rise in Chicago? Do we have to split up the desks? Do we have to wipe down every single area of the office several times a day? One person in the elevator, shifts, like it's a lot. If that's the move. Now there's different cultures out there, and there's different ways that employees become engaged. So if you take I know a lot of logistics brokerages or staffing companies, or a lot of the tech scene here in Chicago, where like the office is the culture, the talent branding, the culture, the engagement of employees is around working alongside and locking arms with your team members on a day-to-day basis. And that proves productivity, that proves, mission, vision, values of the organization. And then you have organizations like, I don't know, but like mine, 30% of my staff is former stay-at-home parents that they're entering the workforce with us. And they're at, various stages of their life where, they really, really enjoy working from home. And by the way, we've been 100% remote since I started the business. And they love it. They don't want to go back to an office, and they would probably quit if I said, hey, we're switching gears. We're going back to the office. So I think it's all about not, what worked for you before is probably going to dictate how you go about this on a go forward basis through the lens of maybe what your employees want, how they can become engaged.
I think one thing worth noting though is we're going to talk about diversity in a moment, obviously. But if you have a diverse work group, or if you want to drive more diversity, recognize that not every single person succeeds or works effectively the same way. And you gave a good example of someone home with young children that might need to take them to daycare and then try to get a commute down to an office. And by the time they get there, they're fried already from their morning, versus walking across the street, dropping the kid off, coming home and getting ready for your first meeting at 8 a.m. There's like a benefit to that. There's also individuals who may not like distractions of an office, and someone who's, head down, figuring out a data set that they need to, be super involved in, and people are running around with Nerf guns trying to, have a little culture building on the side. Like, that might not be productive for that person either. So I think there just has to be a consideration for what a diverse workforce needs to be effective and productive and start to frame out your offerings.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts, Elles or Randi, before we move on?
I just had a thought on your mention of leadership. I think, for Centro specifically, and actually I think across the industry, the nice part, again, I keep being very positive about COVID. The nice part about this situation is it has forced us to try it. And, I think I'll speak for Centro specifically, we've had leadership who wasn't sure, we have a flexible workforce, but they weren't necessarily totally comfortable with remote. And now that we've gone remote and they've seen it work, it shifts it. So that's one benefit where this has given us something to evaluate, which is helpful, because otherwise you're just, again, hypothesizing. So that's where the feedback from employees of how do you feel different or not? And, from a talent attraction perspective, if we want to stay with the competition, it is going to shift. There's just, to your point, or to whoever made the point about candidates, that's going to be top of mind for sure.
It sounds like a good segue into a next topic, just around talent acquisition, retention management, the playbook of the bull run. 8 years, growth, low unemployment environment, which creates a war for talent. This is probably a little bit too soon for organizations that maybe went through a reduction in force. But such as to say, if you're thinking strategically, or if the listeners are starting to think strategically about how they're going to run their operations on a go-forward basis, I think pointing out the facts that going from a low unemployment environment where you're really having to spend a lot of money on talent branding, sourcing strategies, proactive internship programs, and promote from within, to there's a lot of great talent out in the marketplace, and how do we go about doing that? Coupled with the fact that some of the points I made in the introduction, you might be doing the job with one hand tied behind your back, whether that's because of budgetary reasons and cost containment becomes top of mind, or just bandwidth on your team. You just don't have the bandwidth that you did before. So you made a comment, Elles, about how to stay relevant out in the marketplace, because this is going to pass at some point, and you have to be ready with what that playbook is. How is your team thinking about that piece?
Yeah, so we're fortunate where we still have our recruiting team. I know a lot of companies have had to make impact there. So we, have had an opportunity to turn them proactive when normally it's so much volume. And so I mentioned in the beginning that we had the opportunity to meet with leaders and talk about, when we come out of this, how do we become stronger? What does your organization look like? How does the business need to run? And so off of that, those insights were passed to our recruiting team to say, here's, the key players or the key types of talent that we know that once we start hiring again, because Centro does have a current hiring freeze. Once we start hiring again, we want the bench to be full. And so they've been still busy networking and chatting, and just, I know that unemployment is up. I still feel like this industry, specifically in tech, is remaining competitive for the top talent. And so we can't really take our lever off. I'm blanking on the word, foot off the pedal. So we're really trying not to take our foot off the pedal, because once we come out of this, it's just gonna be just as competitive. So they've been pipelining in a very specific way for roles that we know we're going to want that bench full and ready to hire when we open back up.
It's a perfect strategy, and not everyone has the I'll call it the luxury, because they might still be living in reaction or crisis mode.
Yes.
The sooner you can get to that point where you're planning for the future, I think, to Tim's point about, or question about, the playbook that existed during the past X number of years that might be very different. I think most leaders' playbooks are changing. I think our sales teams playbook is changing. I think our product and operations teams have to change in order to figure out what they're going to do today through tomorrow to be successful. So I think there's a bit of a understanding that not everyone in the room has all the answers today on how to do things, which gives us that opportunity to try, right? This perfect storm of people challenges that we're facing has put us in an unknown position, but we're not the only ones that are in the unknown position. So that adversity, with that adversity lies opportunity. I think the opportunity to kind of second what Elles said was to ensure that your position as an HR leader or professional is not just reactionary or task-based or compliance-based or going through the motions, but instead of spending time today worrying about the HR part, spend time today worrying about the business. What is the business going to do tomorrow to get through this? Because that knowledge is going to then help you determine what to do from an HR and talent people perspective. But you've got to know what the business is going to be doing. So get yourself in that room just to be the fly on the wall, to know, here's what our ops team is doing, here's what our tech team is doing, here's what our sales team is doing. Now, how do I need to respond to support them?
Yes, and to all of the things that you guys have just said. When we started this conversation, we talked about this people playbook concept that's basically been thrown out the window at this point. Like, thank you for the visual. Nothing that has worked in the past necessarily is going to be applicable for us today. And maybe some things are, depending on your company and where you're at in your growth phase. But the playbook, even the word playbook, it just doesn't really exist for what any of us are doing right now. This is uncharted territory. We are all feeling a lot of emotion, a lot of change, a lot of unknowns, a lot of ambiguity, a lot of just I think the word you used the other day, Elles, was, what was it, incompleteness or?
Oh, we have to be comfortable without closure.
Without closure, yeah. Just this concept of this playbook concept that is very different than it may have ever looked before. And all of these historical playbook topics of performance management and talent acquisition as we've known it before, we're not hiring. We're maybe thinking about our talent acquisition process and how we're going to use a lens of diversity to hit diversity goals in the future for when we can turn that funnel of hiring back on, but we cannot hire right now. It feels weird right now to roll out performance reviews, right? So things that are very structured and formal don't feel great right now in the world that we're living in. And so when I think about this, and I agree about, understanding the business and what we're trying to do to be the best supportive partners, I would also say that this is about time to know your people and reach out to your people and understand them and what they're going through right now, because we can all support them, whether it's a Slack message or it's a one-on-one conversation, or it's just a hi, how are you doing? Or how's your dog? Or how's your kids? Or how's everyone holding up? Or just a point for people to know that you are authentically thinking about them has gone an incredibly long way. And I sit with a list of my employees, and I'll just randomly pick people off of it on any given day just to say hey to people. And I know that over a given amount of time, I'll get through everybody. But it's really important for me to know that I have a good pulse on our people and how they're doing.
We all get in our Groundhog's Day bubbles. a little bit, right? And then, I've always lived by just the concept of putting yourself in other people's shoes, which is more relevant to me trying to do my best by living by that standard, really, since my parents like drilled it into my head when I grew up. It's been more than ever, right? And I think the point that you brought up around, hey, maybe we have somebody that's living by themselves and hasn't seen anybody, friends, family, for weeks on end. If I'm in that situation, how is that person going to be feeling? I have several people on my team that are two working parents with several children at the house. That is a very stressful situation to be in when you're trying to do your day to day, especially in an environment where, financials of the company that you might be working for weren't what they used to be, and there's increased pressure there. So I think more than ever, just from like a talent management and engagement standpoint, Randy, you bring up some great points. David and Elles, any thoughts there about how you're thinking about getting through this time and just making sure that everyone's being heard, touched, supported as they're working in this environment?
Yeah, I mean, I just totally agree. It's been a priority of my team, especially on the talent partner side, on the check-in side, to not talk about people's jobs, to not talk about work, and to just we all just check in with employees and ask them how they're doing and like what their situation is too, because we don't even, know sometimes. So I think, one of our first just leadership trainings across the management team was like, how do we support and how do we, help, and what are some resources that your employees need? And it's been also really fun. You talked about how, or someone talked about, maybe it was David, how culture sometimes is a harder thing to maintain virtually. I would say people have gotten to know each other even more through this. We've tried to facilitate whatever it is. I think in our conversation yesterday, Randi was talking about how we're like cruise ship captains as well as HR, because you're also, trying to get people engaged, and, I want to get a talent show going, and you want to do all the cultural things as well. But just seeing people's kids, I don't have a choice. I have two toddlers around me, so they all have met my children now. Like that's, such an important part of it, and understanding how to support, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, but just, it helps you to gain an even better understanding of what your employees need from a benefits, from a company support perspective, which is invaluable information for sure.
Yeah, my toddler just knocked on my slider window outside.
Yeah, they're not allowed in.
So it's a real thing. A little different perspective, obviously, working with client partners and client companies. But a few things that I've done and started to work with my client leaders. One thing is I've just set up these vent sessions. I just call them vent sessions, where I just say, what's going on in your world? Do you need to vent? I'll give you an ear for 30 minutes. And it's just an opportunity for people to express the difficulties that they're having, and without answers. I don't have any answers, but just express it. And we talked yesterday about the need for probably a lot of people on these calls to realize I'm struggling with trying to determine what to do next. So are we. The four of us are struggling every day to figure out what to do next. But sometimes just hearing from others about what they are also struggling with can create the dialogue on coming together to find that solution. So that's one thing. The second thing is I am working with a client right now who right before this whole thing went down, did their employee engagement survey, which obviously gives them some context as what they're supposed to be working on at that time. But what the work that they've done from a communication perspective around life over the past 12 weeks has been incredibly engaging for their employee groups, yet they're still raising their hands to say, well, what's next? Because they've given this information, what's next with all the other stuff? So it's a bit of a balance of empathy and compassion, talking to employees every day, while still continuing to prepare and plan for taking care of them in the business tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really well said. I think as a leader of others, there's, and a lot of my clients, some of them have excellent EQ skills and they're managing organizations, small teams, large teams. They're managing leaders of leaders and managers of managers and so on and so forth. And they just get it. They just get it. They're leading from the front. It trickles down through the organization. Organizations large and small, folks that are managers, maybe new managers, or managers that maybe need some help with that EQ component. Any training that you can give around this topic, if you want to really make an impact on this and get the tentacles out throughout the organization and train on one thing, is just hit all the managers that are hitting other people. Because I think as human resources leaders, you have to have that EQ element. I think it's like a prerequisite for the job, or you gain it over time. You see the benefit of it. But there's a lot of managers out there that are, maybe a little bit tone deaf. They're new. They need some help in that area. So as an HR leader, if you can push that training out throughout the organization, I think that's a lot of return on investment.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Let's kind of move on here. We wanted to talk about the Black Lives Movement, DEI initiatives. I'll speak for myself here. First, I think it's necessary to point out we're all Caucasian Americans, first off. Me personally, I came through an organization when I came out of college in 2006. It lacked diversity of all kinds. And I was there for over a decade, and a lot of strides were made over time. And looking back, that organization still needs a lot of help and needs a lot of support around this. I think one thing that I took from that, it takes leadership buy-in. It takes time. It's almost like generational in a sense to get it through the organization. But this whole movement, the news has been a huge wake-up call for America in a lot of senses. And America spends 33% of their time at their job with people, 50% of their waking hours. And it's shed a light on this topic for all organizations. And as HR leaders, we're all a part of that. So, David, would you might want to start? You and I have spoken about this. David's done a lot of research and self-reflection. And if you could just maybe kind of start off by walking everybody through some of the emotions and learning that you've done and how you've passed along that to your clients.
A good way to start is understand the emotion. And I think everyone has a feeling about what's happened. That feeling could be very different though. There could be a lot of people on this call and in the world and in your environment that want to lean in and either are ready to jump in and have what they need or are completely unaware of what to do. And there are a lot of people that don't think this is a problem and that don't believe that this is an issue that should be so public right now. We spoke yesterday and we've all talked about how, our hope to lean in is going to make an impact. But I think there's two things that that's resonated well with me from the work that I've been doing over the past few weeks. One is that I think this has to become a true movement in order to make any positive change. And I think that movement is going to require people to get involved and people to understand. And I share that because I don't think this can actually start with institutions. I think institutions need to do their part, but for institutions to do their part, there needs to be people behind that institution driving them, right? Whether it's customers saying you need to do this, great. Customers are putting that pressure on there, or individuals within the organization or the leaders saying we need to make a difference. So it has to start with being personal. And I think to make it personal, you've got to take some time to understand. Rewind 3, 4, 5 weeks ago, what I thought the problem was then, to the scale, to the scope, to the magnitude and the depth, is significantly different than what I think it is today. I did a few things, and this is just to see if anyone else wants to jump on board, to make it personal. Read a bunch, listened to a bunch, started taking some training on things, and just a few resources I might recommend. I'm currently in the process of halfway through a 4-week course called Dismantling Racism. It has opened my eyes to understanding how we got to where we're at today and the reality behind it, more than anything I've experienced in 20 years of an aha moment. That understanding will now allow me to have the grit to do some work behind it once I figure out what that work is. And I'm still learning that. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is kind of the listening from a perspective from people who have true stories to share. And what I don't recommend is just going to your Black colleagues and friends and saying, tell me your story, because everyone's going to them right now, and it is putting undue anguish and pain on them. But I found out a really cool website called Try Living While Black. That's what it's called. And all it is a place for people to come and share their story about what that's about. And there's some good aha moments in there as well. And then, you know, as we start to then try to create an impact personally and organizationally, I think it's important that we look at the areas in which we can. And I never truly divided up diversity, equity, and inclusion until recently. Like, I saw it as one thing, not the same thing, but one approach or one package, and that we have to do better at it and set metrics and goals and whatnot. Look at them independently and say, we have an opportunity to bring you know, different groups of people into the room. Diversity. We have an opportunity to allow people in the room that might not normally or have the ability for themselves to get there, help people. Equity. And then obviously inclusion. Let everyone have a word once they're in that room. And that's just a very different approach organizationally on how to make an impact there. So some things that I've been finding in my journey.
Well said, David. Elles, any thoughts?
Yeah, we have a similar model that we built our DEI framework off of, from the Vernon Meyer quote plus a little bit, but we say invite them to the dance, make sure they have the right transportation or the ability to get to the dance for equity, and then make sure that someone asks them to dance for inclusion. So, you know, from a personal place, there's been a lot of work just the last few weeks on the, you know, individual bucket for me, you know, how I'm raising my kids, how I want to impact on a personal side. For work, it is consumed, you know, my work, which I'm grateful for. It's nice to feel like I'm working on this stuff also in my job, which I'm grateful for. But, you know, with a focus on employees, so just making sure that we actually really understand the experience of our, you know, employees of color and of our Black employees, and that we are opening our eyes to that. I think we've learned a lot the last few weeks, and people are feel more empowered to speak and to share with us, which again, I'm grateful for. So there's been just, you know, it's forced, for lack of a better word, very personal and emotional things to combine with work. And there's not really a choice anymore. And that's been a really interesting thing to watch, because there was choice before. And we talk about, you know, bringing your whole self to work. We talk about work-life blend, but especially, you know, combination of being remote and in your home, and now also talking about beliefs at work. It's just a whole thing there. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. And then on the third bucket, just from a planning side and a strategy side, and making sure employees know that we're thinking about it and committed to it. And, you know, like I mentioned in the beginning, sharing with them what we've been doing to work on it, acknowledging that we're nowhere near where we want to be. And then, you know, making commitments to move forward. And I think a big part of that has been also inviting our employees and encouraging our employees, because they always have the thoughts, to give us the ideas and to work together on it. Because there's a lot that has to do with individual work. So how do we provide them resources to help them on that journey? There's the teamwork, where again, like, how do we, you know, help to support that, and them doing the work within their teams. And then as a company, how are we talking about it? Whether it's through our monthly Centro conversations that are committed to DEI, or whether it's through, you know, conscious leadership coaching. There's a lot to it. So those are kind of the three places where my work has been focused, both personally and professionally, the last few weeks.
Well said. Randi, any thoughts?
So this is a topic that, especially for smaller organizations, for example, I'm a one-person people function. You know, this takes a lot of time and a lot of attention, and I'm very excited because my entire leadership team is now partnering with me on this topic, where historically it wasn't necessarily a front and center, and now I now have the bandwidth of a lot more people to move this forward. So that's really, really exciting. And it's not even me moving this forward, this is the organization moving this forward, and it means so much more for everybody that this is an organization-wide effort. So we came out of Black Lives Matter right after, it was like, we have to act, we have to do, we have to go, go, go. And so we created 3 different subcommittees as an organization focused on hiring, to really look at our processes for when we can get there and figure out what do we want that to look like. We have a team focused on volunteering and fundraising. We've already raised over $8,600 during the month of June, and we're targeted 10K by June 30th, which is super exciting. And then we have an education group to launch different training programs for our people. So it was an interesting balance of this like go, go, go mentality, and some of the other things that David and Elles have said, which is like, we can do all of these things and we can go, but we're now kind of taking a step back to realize that we need to actually do some significant internal work as individuals for this to make a meaningful impact. And so we have a weekly diversity meeting as a company. Anybody can join that they want to, and every week we talk about specific topics, and they're big, heavy, heated, interesting topics. We use Zoom breakout rooms, and we get people talking about things that are uncomfortable, but we have a book club around white fragility, and we're just getting people to really dig in and really think about getting fully immersed on topics that maybe they weren't super connected to in the past, but now they care a ton about, and how that can enable them to be better individuals, better in our society, and better at para.
Really well said. I have a couple thoughts there. As I started my business 2 years ago, we have 32 team members. You know, Parlo's been in growth mode. You're a one-person people team. You have to, if you're in a position where you have a smaller team, you got to start this stuff early. It's really hard to move a Titanic-sized ship, really with change management around anything, but especially this, where the problem is, you know, there's been a ton of articles and statistics around C-level leadership and how many people of color and women are in leadership roles. That can't be changed overnight, you know, and it's got to start somewhere. And I think the deep-rooted issue is, if I'm a person of color, if I'm a woman and I join a company where my office has 25 people, do I have somebody that I can look up to that is like me in a certain way, that I can see a path to be like he or she one day? Or do I not see that at all? And it's just going to give me a reason to go find that place that I want to be in, where I feel included, and I do have that opportunity. And that's all across the place, all over the board. And companies are at different stages with this, but especially if you're smaller, you got to start early. And I think pointing out that it takes time. If you're looking at, and this is an uncomfortable conversation, but systemic racism as it stands, the generational side of it, my parents' generation to my grandparents' generation to their parents' generation. And I know and hope that, you know, my sons are 5 and 3, that when they get older, we're just going to have seismic shifts in the right direction, but it's not going to be there, and it's going to take some time, but you have to start somewhere. And it's very much on the HR function, and I'd love to hear your thoughts around this. You need leadership buy-in. If leadership is not bought in to anything that you're trying to do change management around, specifically this, tone deaf, folks are going to sniff it out right away, and it's going to impede a lot of the progress. So maybe speak to, I don't know, David, your clients, maybe leaders that you all are working with. It sounds like you have great leadership that's making a lot of movement around this, but how important is that leadership buy-in to the movement and making waves with this?
Well, so you said it's, you know, an HR function, or HR people need to be involved in this. I get that importance. But I think this needs to, I'm going to use the word everyone, and I almost mean everyone. It needs to get to a point where everyone is comfortable having uncomfortable conversations, whether you believe in the direction or not. Because as soon as a group is excluded from the conversation, the movement stops within that group, and then that will start to spread. And so I listened to another podcast. It's called the Simply Be podcast, and a Black woman was on there, very bluntly telling her story and her thoughts on this movement. And one thing that she said that struck with me is about the, like, how long, the host asked, how long are white people going to have to feel uncomfortable before we get comfortable with this? And she said, well, Black people have been feeling uncomfortable for 450 years. So let's just say forever, or at least 450 years. And what that struck me with is that, like, I said to my wife, I think I'll go to my grave now knowing that this is something that if I'm not making an impact in, then I've given up. Because to your point, Tim, it's not going to end overnight, or it's not going to fix itself overnight. And so I think that seismic shift is going to be needed for everyone, even if everyone isn't necessarily like thumbs up, count me in. I just think it has to continue, and that's within leadership and everyone around you. So yeah, I will unfortunately turn down clients moving forward that aren't willing to have open conversations about the value within their organization and the world, because that's kind of one of my commitments. So.
Well said, David. Randi, Elles, any thoughts on the importance of everyone's buy-in, or specifically leadership?
Yeah, I can go. Something that brought up for me that David was just talking about is even before this, about a year ago, I went to a dinner with other DEI leaders just in the tech space, diverse group around the table. And the first question that was thrown out, I think it was the head of diversity at Pinterest. She said, okay, what's the last thing that you've effed up on? I won't swear on the recording, because there is an assumption and a comfort level that you have to get used to, that you are going to mess it up, that half the organization is going to like what you said, half the organization is not. And so from an HR perspective, I've really worked on just getting comfortable with that. Like all companies, Centro conversation, just saying like, I'm definitely messing this up. I'm a white woman standing up here. Let's have a conversation. And now it has expanded to accountability across all of leadership. And that wasn't necessarily there before. People look at our CEO, he kicked off these initiatives. And so, that's clear, but across the executive team, I think it's a different feeling from employees, especially 2 weeks ago when, the heat was on from employees to companies asking, what are we doing? How can I hold you accountable, company? And they're still there. But it wasn't just company. It wasn't just, okay, if HR rolls out a bunch of things, we'll be fine with that. It was, what are my individual leaders doing personally to work on this? What are my individual leaders doing personally to shift this industry? And so that's been a great discussion at the executive level of how are we committed as a company, and how do we show employees that? Because we have a company that cares. Everyone at Centro, supports and cares, but it's actually the actions and the transparency and the work that's now being really looked at with a microscope, rightfully so. And I think that for me, it just feels like a true movement when you have, Centro is 85% white, and you have an 85% white company who is putting pressure on us. Like that's a good thing for the movement, but certainly a new and interesting challenge for companies. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, all of those things are 100% spot on. And as a HR person, this is not completely an HR thing. This is an everyone thing. This is a leadership thing. And in the last few weeks, our people wanted to hear from leadership. What is leadership doing? They wanted to hear leadership acknowledge, where did the company fall down in the past? When you think about engagement surveys and you think about do I believe in leadership? Do I trust leadership? Any version of that kind of question, this is the moment that they're directly looking and correlating with to say, do I believe in these people? Mm-hmm. Like, this is that moment. And can they see through what they're telling us and live it day in and day out moving forward? It's more than just the company mission, vision, and who we are going forward. This is innately, who are we as an organization? What is our heartbeat? And what does that look like into the future?
By the way, I recommend under committing and over delivering. because
Yeah.
don't have someone out there saying, we're going to do all this if you can't get there. Say, hey, we're going to start small, but we're committed to making a difference, and find ways to
Mhm.
over deliver, because people will be watching. And so let's show them something that we can actually do, and get them to say, well done, way to make an impact.
And
But
Yeah, oh, sorry. I would just add to that. I commend our CEO these past few weeks as we've been navigating. And yesterday we had an all company call, and, talked about how long term this is. Like, again, going back to being comfortable without closure, and also how it's everyone's job. It's not just the leadership's job to turn the ship, and that call to action and that empowerment is, can be powerful when used, when delivered in the right way. So I've appreciated that, making us even stronger through that. So
leadership is needing to just unify right now. Unify from the top. We did an employee marketplace to raise money where people were selling cookies and all sorts of random services, astrology, all sorts of
I
things.
love that.
It was super
Astrology.
yeah, all super fun things. But it got everyone involved, right? And we had leaderships participating in the marketplace too. But it's, setting the tone at the top is more that we could do today than we've been doing in the past. And I think that should and probably does resonate with almost every organization.
Mm-hmm. Definitely stealing that idea, by the way.
That's great. Well said, guys. I really appreciate you carving out some time. I'll kind of bring us home here. When all my clients are HR leaders like yourself, big companies, small companies, maybe some small business owners. 2020, this whole pandemic, the results of this pandemic from a financial standpoint, layoffs, everything that we've been talking about. This is such a loaded conversation. And I really appreciate you carving out the time to do this. Not to say, hey, here's the playbook going forward. Here's what you got to do. Here's the silver bullet to get through this. But just to point out and say, this is a really tough time for a lot of folks, especially HR folks, entry level to senior leadership. And recessions happen and stuff happens that's bad. And going through the last recession in this industry, it felt like at the moment it was just going to continue. It was no end in sight. I felt like, I'm sure a lot of people right now are feeling, especially back then, that the walls are kind of closing in on you. And just know that there's a lot of people going through the same thing that you are. There's
Mhm.
folks that have been there before that you can reach out to and say, hey, what was it like in this kind of instance? But just know we're going to get through it. It's gonna pass. We're gonna get out the other side. It's gonna look a little bit different. There's good things that are coming out of this. There's hardships that are coming out of this. There's tough conversations that are coming out of this, but it'll pass. And I think if everyone just kind of locks arms, shares best practices on platforms like this, and comes together, we'll all finish off in a better spot in all the areas that we talked about.
These are valuable. Tim, thanks for bringing us together, and the people that you bring together on a variety of topics. I can't believe you're 20 down. This is a really good resource.
Thank you, David. Randi, David, Elles, thanks again. Reach out to these three folks on LinkedIn. They're great, great people, great all around. We'll talk to everyone soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Randi, Elles.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.